Chapter 13. Reunions. Caleb was jerked out of sleep by someone pulling him halfway out of the chair. He had been dreaming of battling a horde of ghouls, and for a fraction of a second he was convinced they had finally run him through. But the familiar voice called him quickly back to the study. He opened his eyes and saw Layla standing in front of him with a wide smile and tears in her eyes. "Caleb, I knew you were alive. I knew you would be back," she said. Caleb blinked as the haze of sleep fell away, and he stood and hugged her tightly with relief that she was still alive. "Didn't I tell you?" she said into the hallway. Anselm sauntered in from the kitchen, eating a borrowed apple on the edge of a knife. A few clasps on his warden robes were unfastened under his neck, and the cloth was darkened and torn in several places with the grime of battle. He had a grin on his face as he walked into the study and saw Caleb, but the circles under his eyes showed he had not slept much of late. He leaned against the door frame, moving his satchel out of the way to a more comfortable position. "So you made it back, eh?" he said as he carved the skin off the apple. "I heard all about your little flight from about 100 people in the castle today, and I can't wait to hear which account is true. Layla insisted we come here every quarter of each day until you turned up. And here you are," she said, stepping back to look at him, her smile still beaming. She looked unrested as well, and her long red hair was unkempt. She wore a dark green dress of expensive fabrics, but it was covered in dirt and ashes from hours of assisting her father and cleaning the streets. Her face turned to a scowl and she hit him on the chest. "You had me worried to death." She was all right. Caleb stretched. He felt completely renewed, if not sore all over. Morning light rays stretched from the windows across the room, one falling right onto Leothran by the fireplace, illuminating her strangely. "Ansel," Caleb said. He had no idea where to start. "What happened? Do we know anything about all of this?" "Not enough for my liking," he said with his mouth full of apple. "Not yet. But we're working on it. We were attacked from the inside, if you hadn't guessed. That much is certain. Many of the ghouls came from the cellars and basements of the West District," Layla added. "We have discovered many hidden tunnels down below, very small, but it is quite clear now that that is how they had been gathering." "And for quite some time," Caleb frowned. "That explains the condition of the West District. It must have taken months of constant labor to dig those tunnels," he mumbled. "My sister and I saw the Talgarth sage that shot that signal into the sky, while we were out on one of the tower overlooks," Anselm continued. "They were in the castle that night too, hundreds of them. Men. Wardens. Ghouls. Ella and I were able to kill 2 of their sages before they reached the king, but more troops followed soon after. Along with the king's defenders, we could only just hold them off. King Hallis himself even took a nasty blow to the head. He is alive but not well." Caleb shook his head in disbelief as he listened. Layla spoke up next. "They all fled soon after you were taken away," she said. "My father took me back toward home to look for my brothers." She looked at the ground. "They're not?" Caleb started to ask, but she shook her head. "No. They are both alive. But not well either." She held her head higher with a stern look on her face, trying to be strong. It did not come often, but Caleb knew that face. She was holding back tears. He touched her hand and sighed, feeling at a loss for words. "Grimhall cost us much more than we ever knew," Anselm said with a sour face. "While we were away north securing Grimhall, they were moving the last of their forces right onto our doorstep. How they were able to unite and arm filth such as ghouls to their cause is beyond me, but that made it all too easy for them to build an army right under our noses. We've already uncovered cold campsites around Avondale in the forests and caves near the mountains. This feat required brilliant strategy and much patience and stealth. Quite impressive, actually." Caleb clenched his fists into tight balls. "They used Grimhall," he hissed. "They used King Rawlin as a puppet to lure us away." The image of King Rawlin on the edge of his sword in those dark chambers burned in his memory. They manipulated him, reduced his once noble spirit to nothing, and used him to strike at the heart of Avondale. Fate damned them to the abyss. "Caleb, who is that?" Layla asked, cutting him off short and gazing at the woman asleep by the fire. Anselm looked in that direction with his eyebrows raised. He looked at Caleb expectantly. "Tell us what happened after you were taken," she said. "It's a strange story," Caleb said, hesitation in his voice. "But I will explain. This woman is, well, I believe she is the dragon we fought at the wall." His friend's wide eyes turned to the woman again. Layla looked ready to throttle her. Anselm looked fascinated. Caleb recounted the story in detail. He deliberately left out the parts relating to the state of the woman's clothing, but from the expression on Layla's face and the glare she was shooting at the sleeping woman, he was sure she put the pieces together herself. "This woman is a shadow walker?" Anselm asked in wonder. "How did she survive?" Caleb shook his head. "I'm not sure. She seems to have incredible rejuvenation abilities. All of the wounds from the first night, and there were many, seem to have disappeared." "Unbelievable," Layla muttered, still frowning skeptically. "Have even the shapeshifters joined Talgarth then? I suppose their fabled dark ways are more than just rumor. But I thought they were at war with Talgarth." "We don't know anything yet," Caleb said. "She woke for just a moment last night and said her name is Leothran. Then she said something odd. She thanked me for freeing her. I don't know what she meant, but she did not seem hostile to me. She needs the healing of a warden and fast." "But why?" Layla asked, a little sharply. "She killed so many. Destroyed our city. I could put a dagger through her heart right now." Her voice shook with the rage of a personal vendetta. She lowered her head in reconsideration. "You want to heal her?" "She could know something about the invader's next move," Caleb said. "She may be able to help us yet, even if she is dangerous." Anselm walked over to the fireplace and crouched down beside her. Caleb could see he was taken aback by her beauty just as he had been, and had to shake it off before examining her wound. He lifted the edge of the bandage gently and peeked underneath. "This is beyond repair. No warden can heal an eye like this. But if she hasn't died, a healing would perhaps restore her to good health. Perhaps. Though we will need the help of other wardens. There are a few of my men that are capable." "No," Caleb said. "We can't let anyone else know who she is just yet. The whole city would be at our door with swords and spears in hand before nightfall." Anselm nodded in thought. "I suppose you're right. But I won't be able to do this myself. It will surely require a great deal of strength, and we will most likely need to be calling on the power of a second-degree deity." He looked at the eye one more time and nodded, reassured. "Definitely a second-degree hex." "Elastra would help," Caleb said. Layla looked up at the mention of her name and pursed her lips. Caleb was very aware of their mutual dislike, and was not fond of the idea of them being in the same room either, but there was no other way. Anselm sighed. "I was afraid you'd say that. I suppose you're right though. There is no other choice but to bring that fool into this too." He stood up from his crouched position and looked back at Caleb, who was now leaning on the windowsill and looking out into the sunny streets at the streams of smoke and ruin. "Layla," he said. "Where is my father? Is he with the king?" "Your father has left," she answered. "Left Tritus and is making his way south following the Talgarth armies." Caleb turned around, startled. "He went after them? Alone?" Layla pushed her hair back behind her ears. "He left the night of the attack," she said. "No more than an hour after the enemy fled. He asked me to deliver a message to you, should you return. I knew this would be the best place to find you." "What message?" "Your father said that he would follow them and learn what he could. He will be waiting for you in Shorewell as soon as you are able to come, and said he would find you when you did." "Shorewell?" Caleb tried to put the pieces together. "Out of Avondale and into Manon." Anselm returned his knife to his belt by his satchel, and licked the apple juice from his fingers as he spoke. "He is convinced that the invaders' ships have taken port in the harbor of Shorewell. Some think they may be coming to take their men back across the Fourth Sea to the Estelans. We can only hope that they are not returning with a fresh host of men." "But they have been beaten here," Layla protested. "How could they go on without taking time to rebuild their armies?" Surely they can't have more forces. Caleb marched away from the window towards them, a determined look on his face. We cannot underestimate Talgarth or its queen, he said. What has happened here has revealed that much. And if my father says I need to go to Shorewell, then that is where I go. Commander Arvis can handle the aftermath without me. I have to be off as soon as possible. I'm coming with you, Layla said readily. Her voice immediately parried Caleb's thoughts to argue. He knew it would be pointless. I know it will be dangerous, she said, seemingly reading his thoughts. But no more dangerous than here, and you know I am perfectly capable. She's right, Anselm said. Her aim with a bow is better than yours, Caleb. You have her brothers to thank for that. He looked Layla up and down, still wanting to persuade her to stay. She wants to be with me. And I her. And as long as she is by my side, I can protect her. I won't leave her again. He smiled and nodded. Well, for now we had better get that woman to my sister, Anselm said. Caleb nodded, and Layla rolled her eyes but did not protest. Layla ran off to fetch a wagon they could use while Caleb ate an improvised breakfast, then went upstairs to restock the pockets of his new clothes. He chuckled at the knife he had crafted in the mountains, and left it on the old shelf to the right of the door. He fingered the silver and gold ring with the ruby stone that he had purchased for Layla so long ago now. The thought entered his mind to leave the ring behind as well. Their courtship was now only a shadow, and even if they wanted to try and mend it, that time would have to wait even longer now. Despite his rationale, he dropped it into his pocket anyway. He washed his face and hands in a water basin in the corner of the room. It had been days now since he had bathed properly, but that would have to come later. Layla returned within the hour, bringing one of her father's small trade wagons drawn by her own horse, Ollie, a grey animal with a dark mane and tail. Together Anselm and Caleb carried Leothran to the back of the cart, where Layla had laid down a carpet of hay. She eyed her suspiciously as they rested her in the wagon. Layla led the way down the gloomy streets of Tritus, walking Ollie by the reins next to Caleb, while Anselm sat on the back of the cart hanging his feet over the edge, and reading past entries in his records, replenishing some of his old lost memories that would likely be taken again when a hex happened to call for it. Periodically he stopped reading and stared at Leothran. The situation at the castle was grim. They passed through the large arched doorway of the outer wall and onto the royal grounds to find the ruin of war still littered across the expanse. Soldiers and servants alike milled about, some hauling chunks of damaged structure into large piles of wood and stone, others clearing away felled trees and statues. They stopped Ollie just outside the open doors of the castle proper, and Anselm insisted on carrying Leothran the rest of the way. They passed through the main courts to the warden's wing, hailed by Anselm's comrades and Elastra's subordinates as they continued on through the torch-lit halls. After checking Elastra's room and asking around, Anselm led them finally to a large domed room with a remarkable mural on the glass ceiling, illuminated by the sun behind it. Caleb and Layla nearly fell over as they tilted their heads back, looking in awe. It bore an ornate and colorful chart of symbols and circular shapes with heads of beasts in their centers, and was divided into two columns, the left glinting with dark color, the right beaming with light. Standing in between them was the figure of a hooded man whom he had heard Anselm say was Mordak, the first warden. His hands were held in front of him, palms outward, revealing the scars of one who has undergone the pact, the ritual to become a warden. Caleb had seen the diagram drawn much less gloriously before in Anselm's records, a diagram of the order of deities, the gods from which wardens called upon and borrowed power in exchange for their memories. Even one who had never met a warden could tell from the depiction that the dark side represented the sources of the corrupt hexes and the lighter, the divine. Anselm kept right on walking with the woman in his arms, never looking up once, as if the mural was no more than a cloudless sky. They rushed on after him. The room they had entered was the size of a large home but was entirely empty save for a small wooden table in the corner and a bookshelf stuffed with hex scrolls beside it. The space was deliberately left bare to minimize collateral damage since it was used for hex training. A single candle flickered on the table, giving light to the golden-haired woman hunched over, scribbling in a book. Despite the tension he knew would be present with Layla and Elastra in the same room, Caleb tried to focus on the more important matter at hand. They drew near, but Elastra did not look up from her writing until Anselm spoke. "Look well, friends. You are witnessing history," he said mockingly back to Caleb and Layla. "My sister is actually keeping her records, though one could hardly read her scribbles." Elastra finished the sentence she was writing before looking up from her work. She clearly had a smart remark on her tongue but stood and smiled when she saw Caleb standing behind him. "Ah, Caleb," she said with a broad, smug smile as she abandoned her quill and made her way over to him. "You're safe." She gave him a small embrace. "Hello, Ella," Caleb answered, pulling away with a glance in Layla's direction. "It will take more than a dragon to bury me." Elastra laughed. "Of course it would. Well met." It was then she noticed Layla standing behind Caleb wearing her best imitation of a pleasant face. "Oh. Greetings, Layla," she said with equally artificial friendliness. "Sage Elastra," Layla responded, nodding her head. "It has been some time since we last saw each other," Elastra said. "You saw her last week," Anselm growled. "Fate, sister, have you really already forgotten? We were all at the market and—" "I know that," Elastra protested. "I remember just fine, it's just that sometimes—" "Oh, never mind." She turned away briskly to clear her things off of the table, as Anselm began to lay the woman down without warning. Caleb shifted with relief. Both women were doing their best to ignore the tension, and he just wanted to do what they had come to do. "Now what's this all about, Ansel?" Elastra said, as she tossed the ink and quill on the shelf and replaced her records into the folds of her robes. She took a seat again. "I don't remember this woman, and I'm sure I shouldn't." "You didn't injure another mark in training, did you?" "She needs healing immediately," Anselm responded. "I need you to help me." "Ah, come for the help of Elastra Flitchett the sage." "Of course," she responded haughtily. "Who is she?" "Wounded in the battle." "You could say that," Caleb said. Elastra rested her elbow on her knee, and a fist under her chin. "I sense an interesting tale," she smirked. "We are sure this woman is the dragon that attacked our city," Layla interjected bluntly. "She is a shapeshifter, and we need her well so we can get some of our questions answered. We brought her to you, because we don't want to attract any more attention than is necessary." Elastra listened with wide eyes until she shifted a deadly glare to the woman. "This woman," she mumbled. "Shadow Walker. And why, may I ask, are we healing an enemy instead of burning her while she is still unconscious?" she asked them all, standing from her chair again. "If it's just for answers, you may want to rethink your plan. She is a Shadow Walker, an ancient black-hearted settler of these lands and capable of taking a dragon's form no less. If she was fighting for the invaders, I'll bet every gold token in Tritis she won't be merrily telling us anything." "I'm not sure about that," Caleb said. "Last night she spoke to me briefly and hostility seemed to be the farthest thing from her mind." Elastra eyed the woman suspiciously. "I don't like it." "Not a bit," she said. "Look, El, we don't have time for explaining everything," Anselm snapped. "Are you going to help us or not? This must be done." Yes, she spouted after a moment, throwing her hands in the air. "But I'll trounce you all if she brings the whole castle down on us." Anselm nodded and followed his sister's lead, rolling up his sleeves. Elastra pushed her chair back and ruffled her hair in preparation. "We will need a pail of water and some food if you can find some," Anselm said to Caleb and Layla. "And we will need you two to watch the doors and make sure there are no wandering eyes in the halls." Caleb nodded and strode out of the room with Layla at his side. "And Caleb," Anselm shouted after him, "you might want to grab a few weapons. Just in case." After retrieving the water and food, they delivered it to the wardens, and Layla shut the door to the dome room behind her as they left. Caleb carried a sword he had taken from the warden armory, and Layla a small knife that swung casually at her side as she walked. "Do you think it will be all right?" Layla asked, looking at the door. "Seems like quite the task, doesn't it?" "It will be fine, I'm sure," Caleb said, plopping himself down on a nearby bench. "They are two of the most capable wardens in all of Avondale. They will call if they need anything." Layla sat down beside him. He could immediately feel the ring resting in his left pocket. "What do you think Talgarth will do next?" she asked, deep concern weighing down her usually soothing voice. "Do you think they will come back? Another battle?" "I don't know," Caleb said honestly, gently putting his hand on hers for comfort. "I hope what Ansel said was true, and that they are heading back to Talgarth. But something tells me it isn't so." She nodded in thought, a little disappointed at the sad answer. "But there is nothing to worry about. You proved that night that all your years with your brothers have made you a capable fighter, just like I knew you'd be." She frowned, and Caleb realized she was probably thinking of her injured family. "I did manage to kill a few ghouls," she said. Her voice quivered. She looked at the stone under their feet, and hung the dagger with 2 fingers. "I did not feel a shred of remorse, but I was still frightened. I despised those creatures, but I did not want to kill them. I didn't want to kill anybody." "I know," Caleb said. "You did what was necessary." He knew the feeling. He could still remember the first time he had killed several larger ghouls all within a minute's time, back when he was first acting as a trooper during the Gruul War some 7 years prior. He could remember the mixed feelings that had seared his soul. Anger and fulfillment as he smote them down, doubt and sickness as he watched a living, breathing thing choke out its last breaths. You should never have needed to know such feelings. Never should have had to experience that. And if I can help it, you will never have to again.
Thank you for listening. Subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Episodes go live every Monday and Friday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The audiobook can be purchased in its entirety on Google Play Books. Get the whole trilogy now in both paperback and ebook formats. All links are in the description.